Hey there, this is Atul from team K21 Academy, and in this video I'm going to cover a demo of creating a virtual machine on Microsoft Azure Cloud and then running a web server of IIS, which is a web server from Microsoft, running on that and exposing a web page on the internet so that anyone from internet can access this. Now, this video will be useful for anyone who is a beginner in Microsoft Azure or cloud, or would like to move on to cloud from an administration point, or planning to do anything on Microsoft Azure cloud. So very quickly, to give an background, this is a Microsoft Azure cloud, in that in order to create any machine or anything that needs IP like load balancer or firewall or any component that needs an IP, first thing we need to create is a virtual network that's called as VNet in Azure. And VNet or network are nothing but continuous block of IP addresses. And these continuous block of IP addresses are represented by CIDR, which is CIDR, classless inter-domain routing. So in this particular case, we are saying I want to create a 10.0.0.0/16 CIDR, which means I'm creating a network of this size. This means that my first two octets, so these are called IPv4 representation. These are total 4 octets, 8888 bits. So 16 here means that 8 plus 8, first two octets are going to be static and remaining two will be changing. So in this CIDR block, I can create up roughly around 65,000 IPs. And that network is then further broken down to smaller parts we call subnet. So subnet is always a subset of my network or virtual network. So I'll be then creating a subnet inside that, which is CIDR 24, meaning the first three octets, this 10.0.3 are going to be static, and within this subnet I can use from 0 to 255 these many IPs. So 256 IPs are available for me. Out of these 256 IPs, 3 or 4 IPs are always reserved by Microsoft for the subnet routing other ways. So I can create these many IP addresses within this subnet, and these IPs will be used by my virtual machines or load balancers, anything that I do. So we'll be creating a subnet. Inside that subnet, then I'm going to create a virtual machine. Now, in order for me to connect to this virtual machine over the internet, I'll be connecting using something called RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDC, which is Remote Desktop Connection. And that connection happens over 3389. So I'll be opening up this 3389 port number as well. Now, once I've configured or opened 3389 port, I'll be connecting to this virtual machine of Windows type, and then I'll be installing or configuring Microsoft IIS server on top of that. Now, this Microsoft IIS server will be listening on port number 80 or 443. So I'm going to open port number 80 and 443 from the internet so I can access this 443 or 80 port number of this Microsoft IIS server over the internet. So this is what I'm going to do in this particular lab for you. So first thing first, if you don't have a free trial account on Microsoft Azure gives you a 30 days free trial account that you can use to practice. And if you don't have one, you can use one of our previous videos on creating a trial account, which is by going to k21academy.com/Azure02. I've done the video as well as the steps here. So once you have that created an account, you should be able to log into Microsoft Azure and you'll be able to see the portal screen like that. So as I said in earlier, first thing we are going to do is I'm going to create a virtual network of CIDR 10.0.0.0/16. So I'm click here and create a resource, or I type here, or you can type here VNet and click on virtual network. Now I already have some virtual networks, but I want to start from fresh, so I'll create a new virtual network. So click on this plus new button and say create a new virtual network. Now this is your subscription. Now we are Microsoft partner, so this is why I'm saying Microsoft partner. But in your case, if you're part of our trainings, you will be seeing we issue you a Azure Pass, so you might be seeing this Azure Pass, or if it's a free trial account, you'll be seeing the trial account here. Now, first thing you'll be doing is you'll be selecting a resource group, and a resource group is nothing but collection of resources, which resource could be a virtual machine, a resource could be a network, resource could be a load balancer, resource could be a database. So anything that you create on Azure comes under resource group, and that resource group will dictate, or using resource group, you can apply the policies or permissions or security. So first time you will not have any resource group. So we'll say resource group and we'll say K21 demo and then AZ104. I'm doing it for AZ104 training program. So Control X and I'll put, let's see, with AZ104 K21 demo. This is what I'm going to be using and say create OK. Now I'm going to first virtual network. I need to give a name of this virtual network. So again, K21, maybe AZ104 K21 demo VNet, and we'll put a name. So Microsoft has a region, which is a geographical region in which your Microsoft Azure data centers are. So you can pick any of your choice. I'm going to pick US East. I want to create this network in US East. Now, next is we need to select IP addresses. So you can click here or click on IP address. Now, this is what I was talking about, continuous block of IP addresses. So if I see first two are static and then IPs will change from here. So I can have, if you notice here, 10.2.0.0 and then 10.2.255. So first two are static and remaining two, next two octets are changing. In that case, you have 65,536 IPs. And now in my case, I want to create a virtual network of 10.0.0. So let me change it here and say 10.0.0.0 cider. Now it's saying if I do that, I already have that virtual network inside. I've created one, another one, and it's saying it's going to overlap with that, which means I already have something similar and I can create two networks of same cider range. It just I'll not be able to connect them with each other. There's a concept of peering which we cover in our program in detail where you connect two networks. So that I won't be able to do if I have overlapping IPs. So I can ignore that. You can also create a IPv6. It's totally optional. And here you're going to create a subnet. Subnet, as I said, broken down to a smaller piece. So I'll add a subnet here. And now I need to give a subnet name. So I'll specify that K21 Academy demo subnet 1, or if you say name subnet web tier. So I'll specify that as a subnet web tier. And then I'm going to give the IP address range, which should be always subset of this. So as we saw, we will be doing 10.0. These first two octet are static and then 3.0 and then cider 24. 24 means first three are static and only 0 to 255 are changing. So I'll get 251 IPs, 5 are reserved for Microsoft or for address spacing. And you click on add here. So I got one subnet. I can add more subnet if you want. We probably might be in future, we might add some additional more complex labs for you. And that time we'll be putting here or explaining you here. Now, once this is done, you can click on security. Now, this is where there's a concept of best in host. I'll park it for now, but that's a very good concept. If you're working on Azure, you should be knowing about best in host. There's a distributed denial of service attack. You can enable or disable. There's an additional charge for enabling that. So we'll leave it disable. If you want to enable firewall, you can put firewall. Now, this firewall is different from another firewall we mentioned earlier, which is network security group. So network security group, where you allow port numbers, we'll cover that separately. This firewall is a separate firewall. Now, then next you select on tags, and tags are give you extra metadata, like you can say what this is for. So we can say that name or any extra data, it's optional. We'll leave it blank, but you can say this network is for production or dev or test, like that. And then click on next, review and create. And now it says validation failed. So if you see validation failed for IP address, let's go back and it's saying, let's look at, and subnet should have at least one IPv6 range. Now I don't want IPv6, so I'll uncheck it. And now we are good. Click on again, next, next, and next. And now it's reviewing. Once it's reviewed again, now in my case, if you notice it again saying validation failed, and you click on this, and it's saying that subscription is disabled. So maybe there's a problem with that subscription. So I'll go back and fix that subscription for you here. In this case, I have a Microsoft partner subscription. There might be some issue with the subscription. We can fix this. And I'll be selecting another subscription, which is I have Azure Pass. You select that. You should not have this problem. Once fix this problem, click on review and create. Give few minutes to validation to happen. And then once it's verified here, validations passed, click on create. So this will create this VNet external part, and we've created this subnet. Now it's time to create a virtual machine of type Windows here. So currently here on this bell icon, it will tell you that deployment is in process. And once deployment is successful, you will get a message like deployment succeeded. Go to the resource. So once this VNet is created, you can come here again and click on VNet and type virtual network and make sure you have the right subscription. And this is the VNet that we created. Now we are ready to create our machine inside that. So we will go to search here and say virtual machine. Click on virtual machine, and this is where you will click on add to create a virtual machine. So click on virtual machine. This is again where you will first pick your subscription. We leave it to the default subscription that you should see there. Now we already use a resource group, so we'll create it in same resource group. Now it's not mandatory to create network and my virtual machine in the same resource group, but it's going to be managed by the same team and permissions will be similar. So I'll put them into same resource group. And then you specify, you say a machine name. So we will pick name same and say AZ104 K21 demo and say web VM and 01. So we have created a virtual machine 1, and then in which region you want to place this machine again, because the machine should be in the same network and network was created in US East. So I have to select then a region US East only. So in this case, I'll be selecting US East. Now, this is the availability option where you select what is availability zone or what is availability set. So availability zone means I'll be creating two machines across different availability zone, or I'll be creating two machines and Microsoft is automatically going to put them in availability set, which means across different data center within a same availability zone for high availability. Again, we have covered a separate video on availability zone and availability set. We'll be putting under the show notes on our blog about this availability zone, or you can watch the video about availability zone or availability set should be in our YouTube channel as well. And we'll put under show notes the link for this too. For now, I'll say there's no infrastructure redundancy required. I don't need any infrastructure redundancy. Now I'm going to select a machine or image, which kind of operating system I have. Now for now, I want to create IIS, which runs on Windows. So I'll be selecting Windows operating system, but you can pick any operating system of your choice like Linux, Ubuntu, or other one. So I'll be selecting leave it default Windows Server 2012. And now it's telling me that size, I'll not cover Azure Spot instance. Azure Spot instance are slightly cheaper, but Microsoft can revoke those machines if there's a demand for them. So I would avoid the Spot instance unless I'm ready to give my instance back to Microsoft. Now size dictates how much memory and CPU I'm assigning. So one CPU and 3.5 gig memory, it should be more than enough for work I'm doing, but you can pick up another sizes as well. And as the bigger size you pick, the more the price will be. So for me, I will be paying, this account is from India, so that will be charged 6,600 per month for this machine. I'll be specifying the username. So maybe you pick a username of your choice and then specify the password. You'll be needing that password to log in. And then inbound rule, this is important here. If you're doing everything internally within Azure network and connect using Bastion host or a VPN, which I'll explain you a little bit later, since we want to access it over the internet, we'll say public inbound port allowed. And we have 3389, which is for remote desktop to connect to this Windows machine or remote desktop client. But we also going to run my web server, which is listening on port number 80, and possibly I can in future add 443. So I'll allow these three ports from public internet. And if you scroll down, licensing, would you like to use an existing Windows Server license? If you have bought already licenses, you can select here. I don't have licenses. The next part is to select disk. So I'll go to disk, and this is where the storage on which my operating system will be installed, my C drive will be installed. This is that disk, solid state disk. The disk can be encrypted. That encryption I can encrypt using the default encryption done by Microsoft, or I can encrypt with my own managed keys. So that's something encryption with customer managed keys. Now we are not creating additional disk. You can do them later. Then next, click on next for networking. And this is where you'll be selecting the network that we created. This machine needs an IP address. This IP address will be inside getting from a subnet, which is part of VNet. So select the virtual network that we created earlier. So here you can either create a new network, virtual network that we saw earlier, or you can use an existing network here. So this is that VNet I showed you earlier, and this is that subnet that I showed you earlier here, or you can create a new subnet here. Now this machine, because we want to connect from the internet, will be selecting a public IP as well. So you can create a public IP. Now scroll down, the network security group. This is a firewall on the network interface card. NIC stands for network interface card. So this is where I'll be selecting network interface card, and we'll be using the basic network interface card, or security group, which is a type basic. You can write the advanced rules. We can always change these later as well. Now from here, I'm saying public inbound port, allow incoming connection from internet. And we are selecting port number 80, 443 and RDP 389 port. And then there's a load balancer you can place. I'm not going to do that right now. We'll keep it simple and click on management. And this is where you can define other things like other management related tasks like monitoring it, or defining an identity, integrate with Azure Active Directory and other things. I'll leave it default for now, and then click on advanced. Will not select any advanced configuration detail. At the time of this instance creation, I can give some additional details as well. There are other additional things which I don't want to complicate it right now. I want to keep things simple. Now tags are for additional metadata. So we'll leave again additional metadata blank. For example, this is a production environment, this is a dev environment, or you want to specify something else that can be used for billing or some other more advanced policies. Click on review and create. And once you've reviewed things, it's giving me a warning that we have opened RDP port, which is not secure, and it's going to charge me 9 rupees per hour. So still verifying and say yes, create a machine. So click on create, and now it's going to create this machine for me. So it might take around 4 to 5 minutes. I'll pause this and come back after 5 minutes. In the meantime, go to K21Academy.com/Azure02 and then create an account if you don't have. If you already have, start working on this here. So the deployment is in progress right now. Okay, so after a few minutes, I've come here and it says deployment is complete. So go to resource. I click on a resource. This is where I see all the details about this virtual machine. I can start, stop, delete this machine. I can connect. Now I'm going to connect, use a tool called remote desktop client, but I need to first connect to the public IP using here. So click on this here, and this is where it will show me my networking section, and it will tell me what all port numbers are open. So 3389 is open, 80 is open, and 443s are open, and these are open from any, means from internet. So I'll go to the here and type remote desktop. If you're doing from Windows, comes with by default a remote desktop connection. If you're doing from Mac, then Mac you need to download a RDP client, which is called as remote desktop connection client for Mac. So click on remote desktop, specify the port number, also the IP address. So the IP address, we go back onto overview, and you need to select the public IP, not the private IP. You won't be able to connect on public IP. Sorry, you won't be able to connect on private IP. So we'll be selecting the public IP. So public IP is 40.117.140.83. And then we need to specify the user. So show options, and username is my Windows, the one which I used at the time of account creation, and click on connect. And if you forgot, you click on this reset password, and here you can specify username and password again and click on update. So getting a password for my Windows, so I'll say password that I set and click on OK. And you get a warning first time saying identity because is not valid because the certificates issued for this remote desktop client or remote desktop server not are the self-signed ones. So you click on oh yes, you want to accept these certificate errors. So this is now we are on the server manager and we are good to configure my web server. So I'll say here add roles and features and then you click on next. This is your configuring now IIS server. Now you can deploy the same thing or a similar web server on Linux machine by installing Apache or any other web server of that can be deployed on Linux machine. Click on next and this is where I will be following just Windows method. So we'll leave it to default. Click on next. Server role, this is where I'll go and specify my IIS. So I'll scroll down and select this web server IIS. Click on add features about these management and click on next and leave the default features. Click on next and this is where saying the web server role is IIS. Click on next. We'll leave it the default features that comes with this web server and click on next and then you click on install and this will take few minutes again. So I'll pause this recording here and come back once this installation is done. So once this is done, you will see the click on close and now my web server is ready. So once I have all I need to now is test my web server should be up and running. So copy this URL, open the new tab on browser, type HTTP and then type the URL, hit enter and you should be able to see a page like IIS, something like this. If you want, you can modify this page and now that will be task of a web administrator or a developer who will give you the code to deploy on this web server. Or you can front end this web server in front of an application server or configure database with this. So that is your lab talking about deploying a web server on Azure cloud. This is the clip which we have taken, or this is the lab that we cover inside our free class on Microsoft Azure Administration AZ104 free class. If you're interested, you can check it out by going to K21Academy.com/AZ10402 is the URL for attend free class. You will have a lot of other interesting things there. Things like who should learn Microsoft Azure Cloud, what all things you should be learning and why Azure Cloud, the 35 plus hands-on lab we recommend in our training program, and then 250 plus exam questions or sample exam questions which we give to prepare for this exam. So if you're a beginner in Azure Cloud or already working but not yet certified on Azure Cloud, then check it out by going to K21Academy.com/AZ10402. Now you can further extend this what I've covered to make it more interesting by creating something like in Azure Cloud. You create a virtual network as we saw, but you create first DB tier where you have one-sider range. And inside the DB tier, you can deploy the database and configure a virtual machine and run some database on this data tier or DB tier. Then you can create a second subnet for apps tier and deploy your applications on a virtual machine, which could be Windows or Linux machine. Then you can configure a web tier, third subnet, and then deploy load balancers or virtual machines on this web tier. And then there's another concept of Bastion host, which acts like a jump box. Maybe I'll do some video in future on our YouTube channel about this Bastion host. And then this Bastion host will be front-end by a network security group so that when you log in from Azure portal, you only 443 is allowed on this. So rather than opening 3389, which is not a secure port, you open 443, which is much more secure port, and you connect to the Bastion host. And from this Bastion host, then you can jump on these port number 3389 for Windows or 22 port number for your Linux machines. This is much more secure way rather than opening a port over the internet. Then if your applications, once you have deployed applications, you allow port number 443 for your public users to hit to the load balancer. From load balancer machines or network, you allow connection, but only from the web tier or this load balancer port number 8000 where my application is running. You can further connect from that application tier to the database using database port number 1433, or if you're using Oracle database, maybe 1521. This is all on cloud, but you also want to connect to the on-premise that you see on the left-hand side here. So you want to make sure that you connect to your on-premise network, and there are two ways to connect. One is using VPN gateway and second is using express route. So you will be configuring VPN gateway on Azure side and on local, you'll be doing local gateway. Again, VPN and express route, maybe I'll cover sometime in future. But in the training program, we have a Azure administration training program where we cover these things in detail with extensive hands-on lab like the one which you see, and we do this whole project work that you will be doing on a real similar or something similar on a customer implementations. So if you're interested to know more about this free class, check it out by going to k21academy.com/AZ10402. We'll be covering things like who should learn Azure Cloud and why, certification roadmap for beginners. We'll cover the basic cloud concepts like service model, deployment model. I'll be doing a demo, but a shorter version of probably this demo. And we'll be configuring Azure core services or talking about core services like Active Directory, compute, storage, networking, high availability and disaster recovery. We also will be talking about 30 plus hands-on lab that you must perform to clear this certification. And we'll be also talking briefly about Docker and Kubernetes implementation on Azure Cloud, which is AKS, ACI, and ACR. So check it out by going to k21academy.com/AZ10402.